Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Raymond. I am the founder and CEO of Cambermast, based here in San Francisco. And one of the things that we do is help enterprise clients deliver really large, complex projects, whether they're implementing a SaaS solution. Usually there's a lot of software development involved. And one of the things that happens almost every single time I come into the company, they're really big and they say, hey, what we'd really like to do is get this project started. How do we do the projects? How do we deliver? And I say, well, let's follow your best practices. And they said, well, we're kind of looking for you to do that. And it happens fairly frequently. So what I learned is that over the years, I had to help organizations through the process of going through change management just to deliver something. Then we can go through the process of doing digital transformation. So we might call that project management in some spaces. We might call it Agile in other spaces. We might call them frameworks or methodologies or what have you. But that's what a lot of what I do. And it's really been a fun and exciting time. And I just went through some pretty big transformations in about the 1999 period. And I was really excited. I was going to sit down and write a book. And then, in 2000, of course, I said 1999, didn't I? So in 2000, we had, COVID hit. And guess what happened? No one was going to talk about delivering any big projects. So here's what happened. I decided, well, a lot of people are going to be working from home. Companies are going to be changing very quickly. And what we need to do is figure out how to help all those people that hadn't thought about digital transformation and change do that. And so that's when I started a podcast called the Agile in Action Podcast. And I'm really excited to announce that we just hit this year over 22,000 unique listeners on the podcast. Our customers, our listeners, the people that listen, it's a free podcast. And it's also available on YouTube. We have them all over the world, the top three being the US, the second US, Finland, and Brazil. So I have some great people on the podcast that I've talked to over the years, and I learned a lot about podcasting. And one of the things that people always ask me is, what's something that you learned from these people that you talked to? And we had some pretty amazing people, like the people that founded the concept of lean software development, Mary and Tom Poppendick. So it was really cool to talk about that with them and then also share that with people. But as they're asking me what I'm learning, I'm thinking, well, it would be really cool if there's other ways that people could learn. And I guess I would like to ask this question right now. And apologies to anyone that might be on LinkedIn. How many people know what a podcast is? Okay, so most everyone in the room knows what a podcast is. I sit down and I record someone else talking to me and we have a conversation and then we publish it out and it gets distributed and I can talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But what I wanted to do was take the people that didn't necessarily want to listen to podcasts or want to listen to 3 podcasts in order to get information that they wanted. So I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool? And this has kind of been an experiment for me right now. It might actually turn into a business, who knows? But right now, what I wanted to do was take this new capability that OpenAI provides on ChatGPT, and it's the ability to create your own custom GPT. So imagine that you have this question. I want to create a psychologically safe space while I'm adopting Scrum, which is a framework for software development, and we're also using OKRs, which is another framework for managing work, objectives, and key results. Well, if I asked you to listen to my podcast, I'd have you listen to probably 3, 4, or 5 of those in order to get that information. So wouldn't it be cool if I just showed you how to get to a chatbot and you can ask that question right there? So that's what I'm trying to do. So what I'm going to do first is show you where I'm at with the current version of this bot, and there's still things to be done. And then I'm going to show you, because this is a developers conference, how I actually did the software development, and we can get into it as much as we need to. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and take that question, and I'm going to bring it over here to ChatGPT. Actually, before we do that, I am just going to highlight a few things. And if at any time you can't see my screen, just say, Bill, increase the screen size, and I'll do that for you. But this is the homepage. This is one of our podcasts that was delivered recently by a fairly well-known and outspoken author. His name is David Pereira, and he talks about all of the traps that product teams get into, where we start building up on a backlog and trying to take things out of our backlog instead of trying to add value to our product, and how we have to constantly step back and think about value. And so these are the types of conversations that I'm having: values, psychological safety, team formations, things like that. And I also produce the podcast on YouTube so everyone can see that. And, the way I do that is by using some pretty cool technology. And I'm not here to demonstrate that to you, but I just think it's important to bring this up simply because it is an AI first product. It used to be that someone like me, and this is actually the problem that I'm dealing with right now, and I'm going to show you how I'm trying to overcome that, is I would record the podcast. It just goes into an audio file. And the way I edit the audio file, when I keep saying, I have to watch this little waveform and kind of trap it, just do this little highlight of it, and then delete that waveform, and then hope that I got it right and didn't cut off some of the text. Now you have products like this. This product is called Descript, and they're actually based here in San Francisco as well, Hayes Valley. And they actually create a product where you can import the audio. It figures out who is speaking, allows me to label them. It creates the text, and then I can just edit it as if it's a document. I don't like this conversation that we're having right now. I just select it and I cut it out. And now it's not going to be in my podcast. It's great. This is something that I think a lot of people are going to start offering in their products, but this is so far ahead. And you can see also that it allows me to templatize this and create this really nice looking video. So that's kind of the process that I go through, but that's not the process I've always went through. I actually had to do that waveform editing way back at the beginning. But I'm showing that to you now just because I want to show you exactly what I'm trying to accomplish, and then I can talk a little bit more about the challenges. So let me just go ahead and open up my browser again, and I'll head over here to ChatGPT. Now, I'm going to show you how I did this, but you can see over here on the left-hand side, it says Agile Assistant. If I select that, I'm now actually chatting with all of those people, most all the people, we'll get into that, almost all the people that I had a conversation with. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste that question back in. And I know it might be a little hard to see with that screen, but it says, I want to provide a psychologically safe space for my teams while adopting some Scrum concepts using OKRs. How can I go about doing this? So I'll press return. And what it's going to do is research the knowledge that's embedded in my podcast and respond to you with some best practices as proposed by my guests. And it will provide that information in actionable ways so that you can understand exactly what's going on. And I'm just going to make note here that as you might be reading this, you'll see, as discussed with Bill Raymond and Lisa Adkins. Okay, so it's actually pulling from the knowledge of this conversation that I had with Lisa Adkins about creating a supportive culture in your environment. So even though this, yeah, great, thank you. And even though this is not just One conversation that I had, this was one of the things that it pulled out because it was so interesting. And why was it interesting? Probably because ChatGPT knows just how interesting that content is, maybe above and beyond some other content I might have on a similar topic. So, I could, of course, keep drilling down here and asking more questions. You'll also notice down here at the bottom, it provides links. Now, this is something I'm still figuring out. For some reason, the links don't work. I don't know why. I'm still figuring that out. But it gives you enough information so you can just copy and paste that and say, I'll go to the Agile in Action podcast website and search for that. And boom, I can listen to the podcast if I really want all of the details. So that's what I did. And that's the journey that I'm going on. I'm doing this for two reasons. One is I want to stay up to date on how to program with AI tools. I'm also learning Python. I call myself an occasional developer because you definitely don't want me writing production code for your organization, but I understand now better how it is that you need to go through getting data and finding its way into a system like this. Now, you might know about GPTs already, and that there's a few different versions of those. The one I'm using, you upload a document, ChatGPT analyzes that document, and then does the responses. So you might be thinking, well, Bill, just take all of those things that you had in Descript there or whatever and combine them all and upload them, right? And unfortunately, that does not work. And I'm going to explain why. Let's find our way back over here, and I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. The first thing that I'm going to show you here is the list of all of my podcasts. Now, along the left-hand side, it doesn't really matter the names a whole lot. All you can see is that there's a file name that has the date and then the title of it, and everything separated by dashes. On the right-hand side, take a look at what you see here. There's 3 dashes at the top, followed by down at the bottom, 3 dashes down there. This is what we call YAML front matter. For anyone that's a software developer that knows what YAML is, this is a way to represent data inside of a file and do it in such a way that it's easily understood. So that's what this is here. And you can see, if you take a really close look at some of this data, you can see there's a layout that I have for the website, the categories, the date that it gets published, who wrote it, a link to the file. It includes the guest name and the guest title and links for the guest. But at the end of the day, this YAML front matter over the years has changed on my website. And I don't go back and fix it. I just add to it. So first of all, if I were to take all these documents and upload them to ChatGPT, it wouldn't necessarily know the differences right away. It may confuse one thing with another. The other thing that we have going on here is that the content is down here, okay? But some of them don't have a transcript at all. It's just maybe a 2 or 3 paragraph sentence. This is what we're talking about. It wasn't until later in life when I started using that product I told you about, Descript, where now I can actually have a little overview of the podcast. Actually, let me go further in life. And there we go. So this is what a typical podcast looks now. I have all this front matter, this metadata that describes the podcast. And then down here, I have a little summary of it. And then further down here, you'll notice every single one of my podcasts has the words transcript with 2 hashes. And those 2 hashes will show up as a title when it's displayed in the browser. You won't see those 2 hashes. You'll also notice there I am, Bill Raymond. And then here's our guest talking further down the line. Looks like I talked a lot before that person. Oh, let's look at someone else. There's me. And then there's one of my guests, Nader K. Rad. And so what's happening here is that all of this is formatted in Markdown. But really what I kind of want is something that looks more akin to this, which is a PDF document. And you can see here, now we can have the title of the podcast. It's nicely laid out with the publication date and things like that. I'll zoom in a little bit, and you can see the transcript. So it's a little bit more nicely formatted. I'm not asking ChatGPT to try and figure out some code. It now knows exactly the structure that I'm using. And by the way, this has all of those podcasts that I was referring to. So how did I go about doing this? Well, the first thing that I attempted to do, and this was actually a pretty bad attempt, by the way. Has anyone tried to do coding in ChatGPT? Raise your hand. Sorry for LinkedIn. Okay, I see a few hands went up. Not a whole lot of hands went up, but maybe you use a built-in AI inside of your software development tool. That's probably a possibility too. But I really wanted to learn how to interact with ChatGPT or some sort of an LLM. So that's ChatGPT, Claude, Llama, things like that, and ask it to have it code for me. And my first prompts were like, hey, I've just got a whole bunch of files, and these are markdown files, by the way. That's what my podcast format is. That YAML front matter that's a transcript, that's marked down. And I said, I have a folder with all these markdown files. Just combine them together, get rid of all the markdown, put the title and the date. It created all sorts of crazy code. It didn't fully understand what I was looking for. It would write it sometimes in C++, sometimes in JavaScript, sometimes in Python. So I didn't have any control. So what I decided is I needed to figure out how I can put some control around this. And so that's what I'm going to show you right now. So as I mentioned, over here in Visual Studio Code, I have a folder with my podcasts. Some of them have the transcripts and some of them don't. And so what I want to do is kind of create a flow for how I'm going to get all of this data extracted and brought into that PDF format. So here's what I have on the right-hand side of the screen. First of all, I decided that I'm learning Python anyway, so I'm going to write it all in Python, and then I can automate it later. So here you can see that I'm going to first read all the existing podcasts, and then I'm just going to find the ones that have transcripts. Because if there's just 3 paragraphs of here's what the discussion was, that doesn't belong in my GPT. That's not to value add. I want the full conversation and the context of that conversation. So we're going to get rid of anything that doesn't have a transcript first. And then what we're going to do is get rid of all that YAML front matter, all that metadata for the document, and just put in the title and the date like I showed you in that PDF. Then I'm just going to make sure that that podcast does exist on my site, because there were a few people that were on my podcast who called up and said, I said too many things that are a little confidential. Can you pull it down? I changed jobs. I really don't want my name listed with that company anymore. Could you take it down? So I wanted to make sure that I respect the guests that are on my podcast and do not put something up that they asked me not to put up. So if there's a 404 error, that means that it doesn't exist on the site, and no scraper is going to find it because it's not there anymore. Okay, so the next thing is we're going to combine all those podcasts into a single markdown file, because that's the format that I started with. And finally, we're going to convert that to a PDF document. And that's what I'll upload into ChatGPT. So let me walk you through what I did. First of all, let's just start with this one where we're going to output the files with transcripts to a new folder. You can see I'm a very visual person, so I put these little markdown, they're called mermaid charts on the screen so that I can actually remember what exactly it is that I'm doing. And then what I even did is documented the way in which I got the code. So if I just open this up, it says, create a Python script for a Jupyter notebook, because that's what I'm working with, and have it do these things. And so this is one chunk of things that I wanted to do. just go through and get the ones that have transcripts and put that into a new folder. That's my first bit of code. So what I would do is go into ChatGPT and literally paste that prompt in here. It's kind of a prompt, create this thing, the files are going to be in this folder, go through the files, get them, and then look for the word transcript. If you see it, put it into yet another new folder so I can kind of track those. And I'll press return, and ChatGPT outputs the code for me. Now, what's really cool about this is after it's done, it's going to also explain to me what it's doing. So if I am not fully familiar with how exactly this works, it's describing it for me. And after a while, I can kind of take it upon myself to make the code even better. But this is my starting point. So what I can do is simply come up here and copy that code and then paste that into my code editor, which is exactly what I did right here, and then just run it. So let's take a look over here on the left-hand side. You can see here's all of my posts. Now what I'm going to do is run that bit of code that ChatGPT created for me. And you can see this is the folder that I told it to put into, and those are all the files. Let's take a look down here. It says, here's your output folder, Bill, and also here's the total number of files processed, 56 of them. Actually, there's 129 files. So there's 56 of my podcasts that have transcripts in them. I have to sort that out later. Okay, but let's go ahead and move on. Clear all outputs. Okay. So that's the first step that I had to take, which was to just kind of get all of that content out. So output those that have transcripts. And then what we want to do is get rid of all that metadata. So again, all this 3 dashes with all this code here, just take out the things that are pertinent, like the title and the publication date and the guest, and put that into the file instead. So what I'll do is come back over here and run that. Now, again, all I did was, I apologize for my scrolling here. This is the prompt that I created, and ChatGPT created the code. I pasted it in, and I ran it. And now what you can see here is that if I come over to this folder, and if I take a look at the results, you can see it processed 56 files. So 56 of these didn't have proper formatting in them that I'm going to have to investigate later. So now I'm down to 56, but let's take a look now. Notice that the file just has the title up here. I'm going to go to this one. The title is in here, and it says podcast publication date and the guest. And if I had multiple guests, it would list those. So that's how this code is working. Now, if I just continue down here, I'm going to check for 404 errors. And I said, okay, ChatGPT, here's my website. Here are all the titles for my podcast. Go up to my website and see if they exist. So I go ahead and run this code. And let's see what happens. It's literally going through all 56 of those files, going up to my agileinaction.com website, and it's telling me which ones don't exist. Okay, so I think I'm down to about 55 podcasts now. But yes, indeed, this podcast doesn't exist. The reason for why this one doesn't exist, I happen to know, is because we totally changed the name and we had a different conversation. So that's why that one's there. But we're still moving along now, and you can see each and every one of these is kind of going into a new folder, so I know exactly what I'm working with. So every time I process something, it goes into a new folder. And so this is really helpful for debugging and figuring out kind of what's wrong, if anything. And then finally, I go ahead and create a table of contents and a Markdown book. Now, I ultimately decided I don't necessarily want a table of contents for something that I upload to ChatGPT, but I can do that. And you can see here, this will actually create, did I run it? 40 combined. This is just combined right now. Sorry. That's my combined file. And then I'll go ahead and create a PDF version. Now, I see that we're at about 5 minutes, so I'm gonna kind of cruise along, but now you see what it just did? It took all of my files and turns them into that PDF file for me. So this is what I learned, is that when you're trying to ask an AI to do work for you, give it a task, think of the first task, have it do that little thing. Think of the second task, think of the third task, break it down into small manageable chunks, and think about where you want to do checks along the way to make sure that your code is doing the valid things that you want it to do. Then by the time you get to this, what you can do is create the GPT. Now, I am not going to walk you through all of the details, but I am going to show you how this works. So if I go over here to GPTs, I'm actually going to go over here to Explore GPTs. You can see that other people are doing the same thing that I'm doing. There is a GPT store on OpenAI with all sorts of different ChatGPTs to do all sorts of different things. And so I'm just creating yet another one. You have a create option here, depending on your plan, and it actually walks you through the process to name it, to describe it, to give it the instructions and conversation starters. And then you can just upload your file. And of course, my file would be that that PDF file that I created. Okay, so once you do all of that, ChatGPT will then give you this user interface. And you can see here, I even added some common questions. Now, people ask me, well, how exactly did you program this? Well, I uploaded the file, of course. And then there's a few instructions that I gave, and this is what I'd love you to walk away with if you're creating a GPT for yourself, is when you upload knowledge, see, I uploaded that PDF file, I have to continuously tell this thing, here's the file name. Make sure you use that file before you use your own knowledge. So, for example, if anyone here has ever heard of an Agile framework called Scrum, and I go into Bill's GPT and say, tell me about Scrum, it might just give you a response about what ChatGPT knows what Scrum is. But by my going in here and just keep saying, make sure you use the knowledge from my podcast first, then the chances of ChatGPT responding with people that talked about it on my podcast is much higher. And I'm happy to share any of what I'm doing with you if you are interested. So I know we're getting down to the last few minutes before we have to wrap up. Let me just go back here real quick. One of the things that I am going to do at some point is figure out how to get all of the content from my podcast that doesn't have a transcript and get that into my GPT. Now, I do have a tiny little bit of code here, and I can run it. How much time do I have? I have 1 minute. Okay, so I won't run it now. But that said, that what I can do is actually read down the files using OpenAI's Whisper and actually have it figure out who the speaker is and create the transcript for me without me having to import that into my tool and do all of that work myself. And then I can put those in there. So, with that, I will do two things. One is I did just start a newsletter that talks about this and other things I'm doing with AI. That's the QR code for that. If you sign up tonight, I will actually give you a free pro account. So I'll leave that up on the page right now. And that's about $5 a month worth for free. And I'll do that forever. You won't have to enter your credit card or anything. So thank you so much for your time.